Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, January 30th, in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're going to start off with a map here looking at something called cumulative downward solar flux. And what's color-coded on this map is essentially a measure over the last 30 days of how much sunshine we've had compared to normal. So where the cumulative flux is negative, there's been a lot more cloud than there has been sunny days, and where it's positive, it's been more sunny. So I'm trying to identify those areas that have actually seen more sunshine as of late than other places. And so you see a lot of the country, quite a bit of cloud cover. Now lately it's been better in California, but most of this time the Sunshine State's been pretty sunny compared to normal, while much of the central United States here through the east has been quite cloudy. One place that took a big turn here in the last little while has been parts of Texas. I want to show you what we're seeing here today on satellite. So as we kind of play this through this afternoon, just as the sun was setting, there's a couple of very important things to be looking at here. First of all, you can see all the low clouds underneath this right in through here. In fact, this is all a part of the really cold air that advanced through Texas today. It's made it all the way to the Gulf Coast. And you can see that low cloud just taking over in that area. The second thing is this. Watch how fast these clouds are moving over the top of this. So these are mid and upper level clouds, and they're really just screaming around this large subtropical ridge that's going to continue to, for example, protect Florida, keep things quite sunny and quite warm there, even parts of the southeast. But underneath this, we've watched all day today a setup happen where that cold air from the Arctic has slid underneath this warmer air loft and really set up for a major freezing rain and sleet event. Some of the snow you see right in through here, by the way, was added over the weekend. I'm going to go show you the latest data on that. This was through this morning. So that Arctic front, as it came down, pushed up against the east-facing slopes here of the Rockies, and as the flow went up, it just really enhanced the lift, producing in some places several inches of snow over a couple of feet. And we did see right here also a lot of blowing and drifting. We've seen some pretty incredible videos of that, how rough things have been in parts of Montana. But there's a very sharp gradient as you go north here as to where the snow really kind of tapered off quickly. Then as this moved out over parts of Nebraska, getting into South Dakota, Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, this was kind of the stripe of snow that was laid down here over the weekend. So just kind of give you a quick update on some of the new snow accumulations here. The upcoming forecast does not have a whole lot of snow for much of the country going forward. We'll take a close look at that in a few moments. But where we do expect to see a lot of the potential for flooding rains is going to be where just this past weekend we saw a lot of rain. I'm going to talk a lot about from eastern Texas through parts of the Mid-South over to the Mid-Atlantic and Carolinas, where we're expecting some very heavy rainfall to already add to what's been going on in this area. So this again is your last 72 hours or 3 days worth of total accumulated precipitation. In fact, let's get a quick update on this. There's the newest data. And what's interesting about this is some of what you've seen through here fell today as ice in parts of Texas and Oklahoma. And we saw both sleet and freezing rain out of this. Now, I pulled up a sounding that was launched this morning. So this is weather balloon data from Oklahoma. And so we're going to use the data from Norman, Oklahoma, which is right here. And what I want to point out to you is this. The surface temperature this morning was 19 degrees Fahrenheit with a dew point of 12. But this right in through here was a pretty sizable temperature inversion. And I'll kind of just run the temperature curve just like that. And I want to highlight this area here. So you see this blue dashed line. That represents the 0 degrees Celsius isotherm. So in other words, if the balloon measured a temperature on this side of that, it was above freezing. And on this side, it was below. So this is 100% a sleet sounding. And you say, well, how do you tell the difference? Well, there's a pretty deep melting layer. So anything that's falling from the clouds here, as it falls, it can melt into this layer. But the surface sub-freezing layer is very deep. Therefore, it has enough time to refreeze on its way back down to the surface. If you were to modify this, let's just modify it and say, let's say the temperature line came down like this. That would be a very shallow surface sub-freezing layer, meaning that we would get super cooling and freezing on contact, which would lead to freezing rain. And yes, there were several places in Texas and Arkansas, parts of Oklahoma, getting all the way into parts of Tennessee and Kentucky, that we did see some of that today. But I just want to point out what has to happen in these soundings to make that occur. So here's the latest data as of 4 o'clock this afternoon on Monday on our all hazards weather map. So still a lot of wind chill advisories out for much of the upper Midwest, getting back into the western plains. But then a broad area from Texas and Oklahoma in southern Missouri and Arkansas with winter storm warnings. And this is an ice storm warning right in through here. You can see to the south of it all all the way over here to South Carolina, by the way, where we have flooding in our river systems and dense fog to the south of that. Out west, we still have a freeze watch that's out for parts, a freeze warning that's out for parts of the Central Valley of California. And but over much of the next 10 plus days, all the action is going to be right down here. I'll explain to you kind of why that's this case and what that means overall. But before we do that, I just want to again illustrate what's going on currently with this temperature pattern. You can see the depth of this colder air sneaking down here made it much farther south through Texas, I think, than was anticipated, which is going to make the setup for this freezing rain event even greater than it was. But notice how mild it is in Florida under the protection of that southeast ridge, and this extends all the way here into parts of the mid-Atlantic. So quite a contrast across the country with respect to temperatures. Now just remember, wherever you have your greatest temperature contrast, that's where the jet stream level winds are going to be, and that's where the most active kind of storm track is going to set up as well. So we watched all day today the animation from early this morning of national radar color-coded for precipitation. Oops, sorry, let's shrink that up one time. This being rainfall, but I've color-coded everything in blue that could be snow or sleet or freezing rain. We do see right in through here today, this whole region was dealing with quite a bit of it. Now, thinking about all of this, that quick rundown of what's just happened, can I pull this back into some broader context for some of the things? I'm just renting a lot of space in my brain right now, okay? And what I'm watching is this. Since the beginning of this new year, we can see that parts of the Pacific Northwest, the northern plains into the Canadian Prairie, then the southern plains and pockets throughout the mid-Atlantic and then into Florida are still missing out on a lot of precipitation. You can see this corridor of heavy precipitation in through here, but it's meant different things depending on which side of the Rocky Mountains you're on. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. We'll talk about the West in a second, but can we come over here to the Midwest? I mentioned this last Thursday, but I want to reiterate a point here. When you look down 40 inches or 100 centimeters, we can still see the remnants of the fall 2022 drought. So all of this area, even though there's snow sitting on top of this, we did not get a winter recharge into the soil, deep into the soil yet. And even some of the rain that's come down here over parts of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, and yeah, there's been some snow too, but some of the rain here has not yet been enough to really penetrate down. And part of that's been because of soil temperatures. Sometimes it's been frozen and it's just not getting down here. But this is something I'm going to continue to worry about until I'm not going to worry about it. So in other words, we see some correction going towards spring. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But the place where we expect a lot of heavy precipitation over the next 10 plus days is already dealing with too much. And that's this whole part of the Mid-South getting down here to the south and into the southeast. So we're going to continue to see this area stay quite wet. Now, a bigger picture thing, and this kind of talks about the whole setup and maybe explains a little bit more about what's going on in the West, is that since the end of that kind of extended atmospheric river event with the jet stream going almost circumnavigating the planet and unbrokenly, well, we've then lost quite a bit of momentum in the atmosphere. So whenever this occurs, the atmosphere tends to break up into more of a trough ridge pattern rather than a more zonal pattern, at least in the northern hemisphere. This is a global number though. But what I want you to see is right in through here, this was when the Pacific jet stream had all that extra momentum to it and just flowed across the Pacific. And since then it has dropped off. And now we see actually negative values, which means there's almost an easterly component in that particular part of our planet. So between 30 and 60 north. So because of the changes that we've been seeing here, the jet stream has wanted to just get bunched up like this. And the problem has been twofold. There's been this ridge that showed up here, which means the flow's coming in and around and like this over these troughs that keep setting up pretty far to the south. Now what you're looking at here is the 17th to the 27th, and we keep seeing these troughs that have dug pretty far to the south, and it's one of the reasons why we've returned some moisture to the southern plains. You got to get a trough pretty far to the south to do that. But then the other piece has been this ridge. So the flow has had to skirt in between the two here, and it's going to continue to do that. I'm going to try to make a case at the end of this video as to why I think that this southeast ridge and the weaker flow overall coming in through the Gulf of Alaska might be something we deal with for maybe the whole month of February. All right, so stuff that in the back of your mind here. So thinking about that, I do want to now touch the west and just kind of give you the latest reservoir data through California. I would show you the reservoir data for the Pacific Northwest, but it's not as relevant right now as the reservoir data in California. You say, well, why? Well, so much of what will happen to the reservoirs in the Pacific Northwest will depend on the snowmelt into April, May, and June. California can help recharge their reservoirs with winter rains, and we've seen that. So the big ones, Oroville and Shasta. Oroville's at 111% of historical average on this day. Shasta's at 87. And you can pause the video and look at some of the others here, but this is just an important metric to kind of keep a close eye on. I will make note, though, in just pulling out one location, the Northern Sierra region, so this region right in California, we have flatlined on the precipitation. And over the next 10 days, I'm not seeing a whole lot more. In fact, a lot of February is looking as though to get a resurgence of that extended jet is going to be difficult to come by. I'll explain why in a few moments, which means we're going to be talking about the need for a miracle March, another round of really good moisture. And to get that, I'll also give you the component that's needed to return that. So we're going to cover all that here in just a few moments. But before I go another step here, I would like to come back to something we've looked at a lot. This is the NRCS. Let me back up here just a little bit. The NRCS snow water equivalent map, excuse me. And as we look at this particular map, I guess maybe we'll zoom back in here. What I want to do is I want to show you comparison. I forgot that this website, which is a brilliant website, by the way, let me just show you what was going on last year. So just for reference, this is where we sat last year at this time. And again, this is 2023. That's a pretty substantial difference. Let me take you back to 2021. And this was the beginning of the La Niña in 2020. Now, the last time we've seen a tremendous amount of moisture coming into the west, was not 2018, but 2017. There it is. So it's been that many years, 2017 to 2023, that we've not seen such snowpack through this section of the Intermountain West. All right, so just an important kind of comparison point there. And let's again go back to 2023. And I just want to show you again the comparison between that and 2022, just to kind of leave something in the back of your head. Now, as I stated, the flow right now is not set up well for the west. You see the jet stream's coming across the Pacific, but we're still getting some sense of split flow here. And it's coming together and running up over this big subtropical ridge. And then there's a deep Hudson trough right here where the flow's coming on the northern side of this. So this is the polar branch of the jet stream, and this is the subtropical branch of the jet stream. Now, what we tend to get out of this is a lot of convergent flow in the atmosphere here and here, but better rising motion all in through this area. So we're going to see a pretty stark contrast between who's going to be getting moisture and who's not over the next 10 days. And right here is the latest 12Z European model run kind of illustrating that point. So notice, if you're from Texas all the way down here to South Carolina, the next 10 days are very wet. And I'll show you the timing of these next few systems coming through to give you this wet anomaly. But we're drier to the north of that. There's a system I'm watching late next week that could get up into the Midwest, but overall drier. Again, where the flow's coming down the broader trough here with the Hudson Bay, well, up here where you're in the good flow, more moisture. But splitting over California, remember, it comes up and around like this and through like this. This is the area that gets all the moisture, but the farther south we go, the lower the probability. Now, we do have today, coming over Southern California, there is a cutoff low. Did you see it earlier? It's right here. Just keep an eye. Whoops, I pointed at my screen. Look right here. And you'll see that cutoff low that's delivering some moisture to Southern California. But that's about all we've got right now set up with this pattern. Okay, so let's take it from there and just blow this out a little bit. This is what the new CPC outlook released on Friday suggests that the middle 2 weeks of February looks like. Now, when I look at this, I say that CPC is clearly latched onto one big thing. That would be some sort of a subtropical ridge, and the flow probably coming in like this and around it. That's why it's cooler west, very mild here, which means very limited chances of some colder air getting through here and staying. Now, they're drier from Southern California all the way through the southwest into southwestern Texas. This is largely due to the position of the subtropical jet, which I'm going to show you in a few moments. But with flow coming in like this, maybe there could be better chances for precip in the Pacific Northwest. This is an area we need to work on. But that subtropical ridge here is what's going to pump moisture into the Tennessee Valley, into the Ohio River Valley, out of the Mid-South and lower Mississippi River Valley, keeping that area wet. So we saw this in this morning's report. Let me step this out and then show you the new European model. Let's even go farther out. How about mid-February, Valentine's Day, through March 14th. And you continue to see the models being very aggressive on this area being wet. Now, the importance of that comes back to one of the maps I showed you earlier, which is this is an area that we needed to get that moisture soaking in deep. So if it's mild at times and wet, that is a recipe to do this. But what it's setting up right now, unfortunately, means that we might see a pretty strong divide going into spring on who had the moisture return and who didn't when you compare the eastern side of the Mississippi River to the western side. Yes, there is snow sitting on top of this. There's moisture in that snow, and I'm glad for that. But to get that down deep to relieve the longer-term drought, a snowpack melt doesn't typically do that. We've got to have the spring rains to follow that up. That's why I'm going to continue to follow this particular story here. Now, before I show you this again, can we go back here and look at what the temperature forecast is expected to be during that same time period? The newest model trends have now backed off on this area at seeing sustained cold. They've just kept it anchored throughout the Intermountain West. Some of this is a feedback in the models because of how much snow is here. They just tend to be colder. But there's better evidence, I think, that the pattern stays weak in the Gulf of Alaska and has to dive like this and then run up over the top of a subtropical ridge here. It just seems to be where we are. The models seem to have latched onto it, and they're just running with it. Now back to that other figure. So we did kind of the next 10 days, the middle of the month, and then all the way to mid-March. Here's the new outlook from the CPC. I showed it last week, looking at that time period of March, April, and May. And the models, all of them, continue to hone in on this region as staying wetter than normal. No indications at this point of a miracle March showing up in the models for California. But I'm going to tell you something. There are some hints that we could be seeing something like that set up, and I'll get to that again at the end of this video. What I don't like is how it wants to just bring the dry back into this area. I wonder if this is a feedback issue, though, in the model, where the bias is carried forward here because there is La Niña when it was initialized, negative PDO when it was initialized. There was already drought indications here, both on the drought monitor, soil moisture, so they just keep it. I have to admit, I think that getting into April, the faster we get the La Niña to fade, the better the chances are that this area does well on precip, which is huge. I mean, that area is deep in drought. Okay, that's my setup. Let's now dig into what's going on in the near term. You saw the all hazards weather map to begin with, so let's park this out here right when I'm recording, about 6 p.m. This is all that freezing rain we were just discussing. As we go forward, watch the cutoff low, but watch the overrunning right in this area. Again, here's the big Arctic high. Here's the subtropical ridge squeezing between. That's the sandwiched layer in the atmosphere where we're seeing this freezing rain. So through tonight into early tomorrow morning, watch this area here on Tuesday. As we go forward throughout the day on Tuesday into Texas, a lot riding on the position of this front and the amount of freezing rain in this area. And this looks to continue through Wednesday and last probably all the way through Wednesday night. So this is the area that we expect to get hit kind of the hardest. Now, let me bring up a site. I didn't have it kind of queued up here, but it's the WPC probability site. We're going to go look at their newest update on accumulated freezing rain over the next 72 hours. There we go. This is their newest data. We're going to zoom in here on this region. That's the probability of 1/10 of an inch. This is 1/4 of an inch. This is damaging at 1/4 of an inch. Here's 1/2 inch. That's, if this verifies, this is a significant event. This will do a lot of damage to infrastructure. This will be very treacherous for travel conditions. This will do a lot of damage to trees. And then this is the probability of getting 1 inch. So it's there. I mean, the chances are, but this is the map right here that I'm going to hone in on and think a lot about. That's the greatest risk area for our accumulation of freezing rain. Now from here, I want to show you this map next. This is what the next 7 days look like according to the WPC. So the split flow in the west, not much precipitation. The deep trough over the Hudson Bay is not capable of drawing moisture past the northern edge of the ridge. So the problem here is that all the wetter conditions stay south. But from eastern Texas, probably into southern parts of North Carolina, the next 7 days are very wet, including the rainfall that just came out this morning in North Carolina. So let's go have a look at this. We're going to zoom in here and do our GFS versus European model setup. So this was some of the rain that just exited North Carolina this morning. But these two models are in pretty good agreement now. Remember last week I was complaining that the GFS wasn't picking up on any of this ice? Well, it now fell in line with the European. So overnight tonight, watch this corridor in through here. It is in both models showing up for the risk of quite a bit of ice accumulation. This is now 6 a.m. on Tuesday. They're both reinvigorating the second wave that's coming out into Texas. And then we go from there into noon on Tuesday, Tuesday evening, coming out to Wednesday early morning. This is Wednesday midday, Wednesday afternoon and evening. Now we're getting into Thursday morning, Thursday midday, and Thursday evening. Now notice there is a bit of a difference in the models at this point of where the heaviest precipitation is going to be. They were in lockstep up until this point. You now know why the WPC is looking at this quarter for the heaviest freezing rain, with the heavy rain to the south of it. But on Thursday night, the GFS is very aggressive at putting out some heavy rain in parts of like northern Alabama, Georgia, then getting into the Carolinas, Virginia, and back into parts of eastern Tennessee, Kentucky. The European doesn't have it there. It's much farther to the south. So as we play through Thursday of this week into Friday, that's wave 1 getting out. Now at this point, there is a large area of high pressure, maybe a 1050 high, that's going to go over the Great Lakes and head toward New England. And as it does so, it's going to send temperatures this Friday into Saturday, way down into New England over some non-snow covered ground. Now I missed one thing here, and I just want to point this out. Back on Thursday night, you do see there is a frontal boundary that pushes through the west. It's in both models. That low is way up here in British Columbia, though. So it's just a brief shot at precip that comes in right along the I-5 corridor, delivers some snow into the central and northern Rockies, but not much. So now let's fast forward this back. We have a clipper that rolls through parts of Ontario, Quebec, and over the Great Lakes. It's actually in both models. And while that's occurring, the next low is coming into the Pacific Northwest. This is Sunday. Getting into Sunday night and playing out into Monday, and I want to take you out to Tuesday. By Tuesday of next week, again, still love the agreement here. Both models bring a clipper through Ontario. The GFS is faster than the European, which keeps it over, parts of Manitoba a little bit longer, but there'll be a front associated with this, and it will slide through. Now, interestingly enough, the GFS gets pretty excited about developing a big low that comes out of the panhandles here, not yet shown up in the European. So we're too far out there to kind of look at the comparison. But overall, we put all that together, and we can kind of take a look at this map first. This is total accumulated precip. We're going to park this out there about 1 week from now, right about here. So it looks very similar to the WPC map, doesn't it? Limited chances in the west for getting precip much beyond the coast. We then see very dry sector here from parts of the southern Canadian prairie through most of the Midwest, upper Midwest, and northern plains, and down into the central plains as well. This is where the wettest conditions are. Now after that, after Mondays, we're going to watch that next system possibly emerge here that makes its way toward New England. But overall, that's the way where things are shaping up for the next week. So if we do a quick comparison, I think I accidentally closed that. Let's bring that back up. ECMWF versus GFS. This is the difference between the models. So remember that wave that was coming out here? That's where the GFS is wetter. That's what these colors mean. Whereas the European stays wetter farther to the south. There's a big difference here if you're in parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Virginia, where the GFS is much more aggressive late this week with the moisture versus what the European is saying. Okay, from here, let's come back and take a look at snow. And you're going to notice not a whole lot. That's a 10-day snowfall forecast. And you can see where the moisture is being robbed. All right. Even the west, until the very end of that time period, did the Cascades start to pick it up, and the northern Rockies do. But other than that, this is not much snow in this pattern. If we look out there fully into week 2, we continue to see better chances for moisture coming into the Pacific Northwest, but still the subtropical ridge keeping this area very active going forward. And from here, let's talk about what the temperatures are going to do. Actually, one other thing here. Can I show you what the chances are? How about of getting over the next 2 weeks of getting 2 inches of liquid? That's a good metric on who's going to be very wet and who's going to be who's not going to see it. Now let's talk about temperatures. Since the beginning of the month, January is going to go down as a very, very warm month. Even these colder days that are right now are going to not necessarily knock these stats back too far. So there's quite a bit of cold air moving across the country now. But again, so much of this month was very, very mild. But here was Monday's highs. We've already seen these. So Tuesday, that colder air starts to move east. Look at this. This is those sub-freezing surface temperatures with the warm air aloft. Subtropical ridge keeping the southeast warm. This Wednesday, getting into Thursday. Here comes the next shot at some colder air through the upper Midwest. That gets to the Great Lakes by Friday and into New England by Friday as well. So this is going to be the first really, really cold shot of air in New England in a long time. And we're going to see Friday high temperatures struggling to get out of the single digits in parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. But that's short-lived because by Saturday it starts to clear east. That's the end of it. And this is where things end up on Sunday. And just like in this morning's model runs, this is what the next 15 days looks like. It's a 5-day sliding window going now through the first week of February, getting into the second week of February, and I'll park this out there on the 14th. So very mild air is returning to this pattern. I want to show you why that's the case. It's all about what the jet stream is doing in response to that temperature pattern. One is reinforcing the other. So looking down over the North Pole, look at the strength of this subtropical ridge. Look at the unbroken flow that gets right to about here and splits in the Gulf of Alaska. That's something we're going to continue to see happen. This is through next weekend, getting into early next week, the 7th of February, 8th and 9th. And I mentioned earlier that if California is going to see a major resurgence in precipitation, we've got to get something happening. And this is the beginning of it. Now, it's not fully what we want, but see this? That is the subtropical jet coming from Hawaii all the way to the East Coast. Now, to give you the perfect scenario for California into March, just move it farther north. And if that's the setup, California will get the moisture. We will start to see those atmospheric river events show up again, and we're going to put a lot of moisture into the west. But at this point, it's hitting the Baja of California. It's hitting Mexico and Texas. And we don't see out there all the way out to day 15, which again is February 14th, any reason to get this jet to extend. There's still a subtropical component, but it's pretty far to the south. So what this means is the southeastern ridge seems to be the most important component to this flow. And I want to talk about that as we work our way toward the end of this today. This is the latest look at the zonal winds, that mean west to east flowing winds, or east to west, depending on the direction in this case, between 15 north and 15 south. Now, these strong easterly winds, they're associated with La Niña. But we're starting to see the westerly wind bursts make a bit of a resurgence, which means today they're meeting right here. But with time, that's going to start to slide in this direction. That's I'm just looking for where the easterlies are meeting the westerlies here. So that means we're going to start up with rising motion, here, and end up with it there. That's a progression of the MJO from phase 3 to phase 7. We can see it in the latest European model forecast. The MJO is in phase 3 and is expected to sweep around and end up somewhere in the West Pacific with time. This is the oscillation of the trade winds we keep talking about. That's an indication that La Niña is kind of losing its grip. Can I show you the effect of this, though? This is what phase 5 of the MJO is. So we got to get out of phase 3. Where we're going to go? Phase 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if we get into phase 5, problem is there is a ridge still in the Gulf of Alaska. There's a southeast ridge, which means this flow comes weakly over the top and then does something like that. And you've seen me draw that today multiple times. Well, what about if we get into phase 6? All right, phase 6 could bring better flow temporarily to the west, maybe reinvigorating that that subtropical jet. But there's still a ridge here in that setup. So phase 6, if we got into phase 6 for a while, much of the U.S. would be happy. And what I mean here by happy is moisture. This is a setup to deliver an active pattern. But then if we go into phase 7, I don't like seeing ridges rebuilding here. But there's that southeast ridge again. This is the pattern where we anchor the deep trough over the Hudson Bay, and the flow comes around it like that. We've seen this lately as well. But in all three cases, I'll just step you back through them. Do you see the same feature right here? And that is why keeping an eye on the strength of that southeast ridge is going to be most important. Now you ask, is La Niña influencing this? Well, I put this in this morning's report. We've now seen that the temperatures here have been pretty steady but started to warm a little bit as of late. I expect this to continue to warm. And we've also seen over here that there's been a big warming trend over the last 3 months hitting this part just off of South America. If you remember from last week, we expect that by the time we get into the end of winter, beginning of spring, for there to be kind of fully an INSO-neutral setup. And there's still the risk as we go into late summer and fall for El Nino to begin to take over. Now, why this is so important is kind of illustrated. We'll just talk about temperatures today. This is why this is important. If we get into April to June, and let's say we're wrong and the El Nino comes on faster, well, historically, warm water in the central equatorial Pacific leads to hotter starts to summer, late spring into summer in the Pacific Northwest and in the West. This is a lot of early season snowmelt. It fills the reservoirs fast, but it doesn't do it in the way that we want, which is with good timing. It also means less of a risk of extreme heat in the central United States early in spring. What about for summer? Well, in summer, El Nino years don't tend to produce a lot of heat right in through here, nor do they do for the plains. It tends to back up larger ridges for the west. So if the progression, let's just reiterate this, if this progression is faster than what you see here and El Nino comes on quicker, it's a major risk factor for the west going into 2023 spring and summer, and less of a risk factor for adverse weather in the plains and in the Midwest. And that's just an important point that I'm going to make out of this. Okay, let's transition international now that we kind of got that out of the way. Since January 16th through the 29th, this map shows you satellite dry precipitation. Now you'll notice that some of these places have picked up what looks to be a tremendous amount of rainfall. Just understand something. The satellite derived precip comes from both satellite-borne radar, but also from measuring cloud top temperatures and inferring what the surface rainfall rates are, which means it can be overdone at times. But one area that it was not overdone was down here in New Zealand. You've probably heard lately in the news about all the flooding in Auckland. Well, we can actually see here on satellite some places picking up between 13 and 16 inches of rain. Now I'm going to zoom back out here and I'm going to just encourage you, pause it. Take a close look at places around the world. There's some places that have been very dry in this pattern. But South America has been one that we got to watch for. Very wet weather north. This has kind of slowed harvest progress by keeping the crop quite green. There's some drought issues that have emerged in southern Brazil, but since the middle of the month, there's some of the heavy rains that have come through parts of Argentina. Now it's overdone on the amount, but there's been some decent rain that's come through here. Now why this is important is because over the next 15 days, a drier signal has showed up for much of Argentina. And while that drier signal has showed up, we can also see that the temperatures are expected to be anywhere between at times 5 to 8, 9, 10 degrees C above normal, meaning we're going to see high evaporation rates again. But very wet Paraguay into central Brazil, this is going to push this crop here even bigger. And finally, maybe a drier signal to the north, meaning we should pick up some of the pace for harvesting soybeans and planting corn. But right now, that safrinha corn crop in Mato Grosso, last year was at 26% planted. This year it's at 6% planted. So we're off pace by about 20%. The soybean harvest is picking up, but the planting of safrinha is off. Now why we need to care about this is that should this just stay slow, maybe it stays here. This just represents greater risk of some of that crop finishing under drier conditions when the monsoonal rains run out later in April and into May. So we'll watch it carefully. I'll keep you up to speed on this. Thanks for your extra attention today. We'll talk again in the morning. Thanks.